I want to talk to you today about Part L and procurement. It sounds like a technical issue, really, but I think it fits quite well with the presentations that we had this morning. In the morning, Bob and Andy Mays looked at the grand picture, what is sustainability, and I looked at urban planning at that kind of level. And Ben actually spoke about a case study that, again, fits in well with what I want to tell you about Part L in specific. In Ben's presentation, we've seen how talking a different language is important. What does that mean? I'm an architect, I'm an architecture technologist. What does that mean to you? You need to move away from this language of looking at just the aesthetics and thinking that sustainability is just a bolt-on something at the end. As you've seen, good projects are simple but are very complex and comprehensive in looking at the environment and the context of the environment. And I think at this stage it's quite prudent that we look at what's happening in practice nowadays and how building regulations have affected the interaction and engagement among the design team. And then I will end at the end by telling you how this should affect your education and what you should do to hit the ground running once you graduate. Okay, let's look at Part L in this particular case. Building codes and regulations have been evolving over the last 35 years based on general awareness that buildings are starting to guzzle up a lot of energy to keep people comfortable inside, but also due to the energy shocks that happened in successive years, from the 1973 onwards, as you can still see. This image here tells you, just gives you a very rough picture about how many countries consider building regulations mandatory, and all buildings should comply with some sort of regulation to reduce their reliance on energy consumption. The graph on the bottom tells us that just by complying to energy regulations, you can, just by complying to energy regulations, nothing more, not using renewable energy, not anything else, just by orienting the building properly, making it sit well within its context, you can reduce 30%, up to 30% of the energy consumption of the building. See, that's your role as architects and architecture technologists. Just get it right. Use the context right. Now, there are very quickly, two types of building regulations that you should be aware of. One of them is known as the prescriptive envelope regulations, and the other one is a performance-based one. The prescriptive one, as it says on the tin, the regulator will tell you, you must, thou shalt, design a facade with 25% glazing and all the rest of it is opaque. So it's a rule of thumb that all designers have to comply with. Now, as you can imagine, that sounds easy, but it's got its problems because architects would rightfully so argue that this is a major hindrance to their creativity. They want to be flexible but still provide a sustainable building. So performance-based regulations come into play in this case, and that means design whatever you want, use whatever materials you want, but there is a target for carbon dioxide emissions that you must meet. So whatever you do in your design, do it the way you want. Sounds flexible, but in reality, as you will see in a minute, that puts the onus on you as designers to be aware of a lot of issues concerning daylight, air conditioning, thermal comfort, and so forth. The prescriptive regulations are quite easy to follow, and normally you will find countries starting by them as a first step, and then moving on to performance regulations. The only reason for that is because performance regulations, to comply with them, you need to be aware of how to use the software and how to enter the data and how to analyze the data that comes out of it. So even in this country, until 2002, we did have prescriptive regulations. Okay? So they would tell us 20% of the facade is glazing, and these are the materials that we would recommend you to use to achieve that. Now it's performance-based regulations, but still it's compared to the prescriptive type. Now, why are we talking about Part L in specific? As you've heard today, a myriad of documents on how to achieve sustainability in your design, looking at sustainable codes, all sorts of documents being published on achieving sustainable design. But if you look at this particular research, it tells us that 80% of the respondents who are architects and are architecture technologists combined, consider that Part L is the most significant piece of regulation that they have to work with to achieve compliance. Okay? So there are other documents, but they are not as important as Part L to them. Now, I'm going to tell you something today about design and build projects in particular, because they are 40% of the projects being constructed in the UK at the minute. And I'm not going to talk to you about residential buildings. These are large-scale projects that are built by the government, sometimes funded by the government, or other developers who can build public buildings. So it's a large-scale building that needs to consider many aspects of sustainability and as well coordinate the efforts of many team members at the same time. So you can see why the client or the developer, the owner, wants in this case, because of the complexity of the project, would like very much to give the responsibility of the project to somebody else, just to pass that on to a contractor, because they don't want to take the responsibility of compliance at the end. So there you go, you've got a client, and without Part L, let's consider what happened before Part L came into play. The linear process of creating a project is still there. You get the client brief, you get the architect sitting there with their teams, looking at how do we create a detailed proposal, move onwards from that to create the working drawing details. So all is linear, everybody is in their silos, in their office, happy with that, no problem. And then, after that, they would tender the project, giving it to a contractor, and say, okay, contractor, deal with all the issues that are coming from here. So the contractor comes and says, okay, I will novate the architect that was working with the client. I will take them underneath me as one of my team and work with them so we can further develop the project, and then we will give it to the building control officers for approval. So traditionally, up to this stage, so after tendering, up to this stage, there has been no contact whatsoever with building control officers. That's to say, no contact whatsoever with building regulations. We don't, as architects, you don't really need to think about it till very, very late in the process. Okay? Well, that's good. That still gives you the opportunity to sit back, laid back, and think, okay, I will bolt on some sustainability things at the end. Some photovoltaics, an efficient boiler, something like that. No real engagement with what sustainability is. No real engagement with what this context creates for you until very late in the project. Well, Part L comes into play, and in 2006, it's performance-based. So up till 2006, you still could go on with business as usual. Don't think about Part L till very late in the process. Okay, they want us to design a facade with 20% glazing. Fine, we'll do that, no problem. Now, the new Part L is different because it tells you, come on, you want to innovate, you want to be free in your design, go ahead, go and do it. But on one condition, you have to tell us that whatever you design, the end result is conformant with the building regulation. That means you've achieved a design that targets energy consumption, that targets the carbon footprint. Okay? That means that you can't stay till the end, you can't wait till that contractor has won the contract. Actually, for the first time, we're seeing that this engagement with all the specialists around and consultants dealing with the design is happening up front. And with only Part L, because Part L is now asking you to demonstrate that your building in the design stage is not going to use a lot of energy, and it's also asking you to demonstrate that after it's built, that it has been built to the intentions So you can't say that, okay, fine, I've designed it to use this amount of energy. Something must have happened while it's being constructed and now it's using triple the amount of energy. You can't do that. Part L tells you that the as-built needs to inform us that the intentions of the design are achieved. And not just that, a year on, you need to show that the building is using the same amount of energy as intended. How could we do that? How could we say that the building is performing as intended? What do we need to do? Now, this brought on forward a kind of document that contractors themselves weren't familiar with, something called a building energy model. So it's not enough now that you visualize the building, you need to also analyze how much energy is going to be used in your design, in the design phase. And that by its own, at the minute, as you can see here, made the building performance consultants, who were previously called building services engineers, just that, now they're called something else, building performance consultants, come into the design team earlier on, as early on as the first concept of the design is being formulated. And this created some interesting dynamics I will tell you about in a minute after I complete this with you. So the building performance consultants would create the energy model based on what the architects want to build, okay? And actually they would advise them saying, well, fine, your building doesn't still achieve compliance with the new Part L. You still need to do a number of modifications so your building can comply. At the design stage, up front, okay? So a lot of iterations going back and forth between the architect and the building performance consultants. And then after they agree on one building design, that will move on. They move separately from there. The building performance consultants will produce a finalized model, and the architects will go back to detail those elements and materials used. You can see here that this is going to be, there is a model here that's being created, and instead of waiting till after the design and build, main contractor wins the contract, actually what's happening now is that the contractors themselves are starting to say to the designers, well, fine, we will wait to comply with all the rest of the building regulations later in the process, except Part L. Before you give us the bidding documents, you need to also show that the design that you're proposing is compliant with Part L. So for the first time, just one part of the building regulations is dominant very earlier on in the design stage. And you can see that now that the main contractors have it, this gives them a sort of a picture of what materials they need to use and the amount of energy that's going to be used in the building later on. They cannot gain a certificate of completion until they produce as another certificate telling the building control officers that we have built the building as planned, and the energy that's going to be used, we've measured that, and it's still as designed, as the original intentions before the building process started. So you can see that there is a number of issues here, and this is the only part of the building regulations that is extended right from day one to the completion of the project, and indeed after that as well. Now, this had an effect on how the dynamics between the teams were. The architects saw Part L in particular as a piece of regulation that's there that has eroded their role as architects. Now they don't have the final say. The building performance consultants will actually tell them, you need to change this area to a completely glazed area or this area to a completely solid area. They feel they've lost their control over the final product. Why is that? Because basically they were not educated in a way that allows them to have a common dialogue between them and the building performance consultants that would tell them, so they can reply. They can say, okay, if you want me to do this, I will compromise by doing that. They have not been educated to that level. they are unfamiliar with what is performance of a building. How much daylight is enough? What is thermal comfort to us? Okay? And this, of course, leads to one unavoidable situation where the building performance consultants are sort of dictating design measures on architects, which, as you expect, is something that wouldn't go down easily. The team engagement itself had some positives and negatives from Part L. You can see that there is a lot of iteration going on at the start of the project, which is something that does cost a lot of money. And who's paying for that? Definitely the developer. But the more work upfront, so these teams are working together quite heavily at the start of the project, actually this is a positive thing, because that means that less errors are going to happen in later stages of the project, and less problems towards completion. But now the contractors are coming back and saying, we will not accept the bid documents without this building model, without a certificate saying that the design building is compliant with Part L. And if the client insists on going through the bid, that means asking several contractors to come in and bid for the project without the building model, there will be a clear statement on the contract saying, if you don't give us a certificate of compliance, you as a client will be responsible for all the costs that will be incurred when we build a building and it fails. Okay, so this again brings the whole responsibility back to the client himself. And some contractors would blatantly say, we will not accept that risk. If this document isn't there, we will not accept that risk. We're not bidding. And this is very strange, because contractors would, as you would all say, they would go to be happy to have a contract and use their workforce for that. So, in terms of litigation, there was, we've done a survey last year when I was with Northumbria, and I went and asked contractors, what happens if after you've built the building, it didn't comply with Part L? And the building control people came about and they said, fine, we will not grant you the certificate of completion. So the building is standing there, the owners cannot go in and occupy it, and the contractors cannot get their money. So I thought that Part L, that compliance or the non-capability to comply with Part L, would make those contractors sue somebody to get their money. The reply I got was quite interesting. It was actually the extreme opposite to that. They said, we will not ever sue the designer for mistakes. We will not ever sue our subcontractors for mistakes when it comes to compliance with building regulations. We will fix the problem. We will pay for it. It's a political issue. We don't want to lose our contracts. That's what's really important to them. So in a way, that is positive. And they said, well, if some air testing or air pressure testing is required, we will make sure that this happens earlier on before we start applying for the certificate of completion. So if there are any mistakes, we contain them within without causing any problems to anyone. So there are some good effects, some positive effects from having building regulations like Part L. Obviously, it has brought the team and the different consultants together earlier on in the process. Forced, if it may be, fine, but still, the good effect is there. The negative effect, as you would all expect, is the iterations that are caused earlier on in the project and the price tag that goes for this. Okay? Now, I told you at the start that it's something for you to do. When it comes to that, obviously Part L is going to be one of the major considerations when you start joining practice design. So you need to be familiar with some basic and friendly environmental simulation software. How do you measure daylight? What is thermal comfort? These basic issues you need to be familiar with. So really when you sit in teams and start discussing the environmental agenda of your building, you have this kind of language. You know the jargon, the technology that you need to use. And it's not like a huge wall and you're sitting there saying, I can't deal with this, I need somebody to tell me what to do. And be it, if I lose control over my design, that's fine, because I'm not really qualified to do that. It's your opportunity now that you're still students, you still have that kind of time to go and research and understand. Okay? I'll leave you with that.